Of all the stages in the world, there are few as sacred, as haunted by ghosts of greatness, as the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville, Tennessee. Picture it, the warm glow of the lights, the polished wood of the stage floor, the iconic barn backdrop, and the palpable weight of history in the air. For decades, to stand in that simple 6-foot circle of wood cut from the original Ryman Auditorium stage was to know you had truly arrived. It was more than a venue. It was the heart of country music, the mother church, a living, breathing institution that christened legends. And in the mid-1960s, on any given Saturday night, one man would stride into that circle and the entire energy of the hallowed hall would shift. He was a bolt of lightning in a rhinestone suit, a fast-talking, charismatic showman with a mile-wide grin, a perfectly coiffed pompadour that defied gravity, and a guitar that seemed to channel the very rumble of America's newly paved highways. He was Del Reeves, and for a glorious incandescent time, he wasn't just a star. He was an event. His voice, a unique and potent cocktail of smooth baritone and energetic rhythmic chatter, crackled from every truck stop, jukebox, car radio, and suburban television set from coast to coast. He was funny. He was handsome. He was the walking, talking embodiment of a good time. But what happens when the party ends? What becomes of a star whose light was so intrinsically, so brilliantly tied to a specific moment in time? The story of Del Reeves is far more than just a nostalgic chronicle of hit records and sold-out shows. It is a poignant, often overlooked human drama about the dizzying, disorienting heights of fame, the quiet dignity of a life lived after the spotlight relentlessly moves on, and the silent struggle of a man who brought infectious laughter to millions, even as his own world was slowly, inexorably changing forever. This is the untold story of country music's forgotten good time Charlie, a man who shone so brightly he cast a long shadow, a man who faded gently from public view and left behind a legacy far more complex, heartbreaking, and human than his upbeat, carefree hits would ever let on. To truly understand the phenomenon of Del Reeves, you have to understand the world that made him. The America of the early 1960s was a nation in a state of profound transition. The raw, rebellious, hip-shaking energy of 1950s rock and roll was being tamed, polished, and repackaged for a new, more prosperous generation. In the world of country music, this shift was seismic. The gritty, raw-boned, tear-in-your-beer sound of honky-tonk heroes like Hank Williams and Lefty Frizzell was giving way to something sleeker, more sophisticated, and far more ambitious, the Nashville sound. This was music meticulously crafted in the state-of-the-art studios of Music Row by a tight-knit, almost telepathic group of session musicians known as the A-Team. These were maestros like pianist Floyd Kramer, whose slip-note style became iconic, guitarist Grady Martin, who could play anything from sweet fills to fuzzy rock riffs, and saxophonist Boots Randolph. At the helm were visionary producers like Chet Atkins at RCA Victor and Owen Bradley at Decca. Their mission was clear: sand off the rough, rural edges of country music. They replaced the wailing fiddles and steel guitars with lush string arrangements, smooth ooh-ah background vocals from groups like the Jordanaires, and a pop-friendly gloss designed for broad appeal. The goal was nothing short of conquest: to take country music out of the dusty roadhouses of the rural South and place it squarely in the manicured suburban living rooms of Middle America. Artists like Patsy Cline, Jim Reeves, no relation to Del, and Eddie Arnold became superstars, their velvety, immaculate voices embodying this new, commercially potent era. Simultaneously, another American icon was being forged in steel and diesel smoke. The long-haul truck driver. The interstate highway system, President Eisenhower's monumental public works project from 1956, was rapidly stitching the vast continent together with ribbons of asphalt. These highways became the arteries of American commerce, and the men who commanded the big rigs were viewed as modern-day cowboys. They were solitary, independent figures navigating a never-ending frontier, speaking their own coded language over CB radios. They were symbols of freedom, mobility, and the blue-collar grit that powered the nation's post-war boom. They were a massive, mobile, and loyal audience, and they were about to get their own soundtrack. It was into this unique cultural crossroads, the intersection of slick Nashville production, burgeoning television culture, and the mythology of the American trucker, that Franklin Delano Reeves was about to drive his career full throttle. The world was primed and ready for a new kind of country star, someone who could work within the polished Nashville system, but still speak with an authentic blue-collar voice, someone with a bit of showbiz sparkle and a whole lot of down-home charm. The stage was set for a humorist, a storyteller, a man who could take the everyday chatter of the highway and turn it into a national #1 smash. He was born Franklin Delano Reeves on July 14, 1932, in the small town of Sparta, North Carolina, a community nestled in the embrace of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Named for the president who promised a New Deal to a struggling nation, he grew up in a world far removed from the future glitz of Music Row. Life was modest, shaped by the rhythms of the mountains and the values of the Depression-era South. Music, however, was a constant presence. He learned to play his mother's guitar, his small hands finding their way around the fretboard. At night, the family radio was a magic portal, bringing the distant crackling sounds of the Grand Ole Opry into their living room. He listened, captivated, absorbing the songs and stories of the stars he idolized, like Roy Acuff and Ernest Tubb. By his late teens, Del was already a performer. After his family relocated to California, he began appearing on local radio stations, not just singing, but also honing his skills as an announcer. His ambition was palpable. In 1954, he landed his first record deal with Capitol Records subsidiary, Republic Records. Full of hope, he recorded a quirky, upbeat novelty number he'd written himself called the Doodle-Oo-Doo-Doo song. It was pure Del, bouncy, catchy, and slightly silly. It promptly sank without a trace. The timing was wrong, the sound perhaps too eccentric for the era. Looking back years later, Del would remark with his characteristic dry wit and a flicker of old frustration, "It was a good song, but it came out about 10 years too soon." It was a stinging lesson in the cruel alchemy of timing and taste, and he would never forget it. For the next 10 years, Del Reeves was the definition of a journeyman musician. He was a man paying his dues in the unforgiving currency of cheap motel rooms, long drives, and public indifference. He recorded for a string of labels, Decca, Reprise, Columbia, all major players, yet for him, they were just brief stops on a road to nowhere. He worked as a full-time radio announcer, a job that proved to be an unlikely but crucial training ground. Day after day, he had to be bright, engaging, and quick-witted on the air, developing the rapid-fire, charismatic delivery that would one day become his $1,000,000 trademark. He also served a stint in the United States Air Force, a period that instilled a discipline and work ethic that would serve him well during the grueling years ahead. The seismic shift in his fortunes came in the mid-1960s. Making the pivotal make-or-break move to Nashville, he caught the ear of executives at United Artists Records. They saw what others had missed. He wasn't just another handsome baritone, he was a complete package, a personality waiting to be unleashed. All he needed was the right song, the perfect vehicle for his unique talents. In 1965, he found it. The song was Girl on the Billboard. Penned by seasoned Nashville writers Walter Haynes and Hank Mills, it was a stroke of genius. The lyrics told the simple, relatable story of a truck driver who becomes hopelessly infatuated with a woman's picture on a highway billboard, a homemade Venus in a frame of wood. The song was clever, it was catchy, and its timing was impeccable. But it was Del's performance that transformed it from a clever tune into an American cultural moment. He didn't just sing the song, he inhabited it. He used that fast-talking, polished radio DJ patter to deliver the verses, creating a sense of breathless excitement and conspiratorial fun. It sounded like nothing else on the radio. The record didn't just climb the charts, it exploded. It shot to #1 on the Billboard country charts and stayed there for 2 weeks, becoming one of the biggest songs of the year. It crossed over to the pop charts, a rare feat for a country artist at the time, and made Del Reeves an overnight sensation. The man who had struggled in obscurity for a decade was suddenly a household name. He had finally found his niche, the talking blues, truck-driving novelty song. The hits came in a torrent after that. The Bells of Southern Belle, a playful, winking tribute to telephone operators. Looking at the World Through a Windshield, a roaring anthem that became one of the quintessential trucker songs of all time. A Dime at a Time, a clever tune about a man feeding his entire paycheck into a jukebox. And, of course, Good Time Charlie's, a song that so perfectly captured his effervescent public persona that it became his unofficial nickname for life. He was now the dean of country music comedy. His live shows were the stuff of legend. He was a master showman, a whirlwind of energy who commanded the stage, dressed in dazzling custom-made nudie suits that glittered with thousands of hand-sewn rhinestones. He was the personification of 1960s Nashville glamour. Then in 1966, his lifelong dream, the one he'd harbored since he was a boy listening to the radio in the mountains of North Carolina, came true. He was inducted as a member of the Grand Ole Opry. He had reached the absolute pinnacle of his profession. His ambition didn't stop at the music charts. He became a television fixture, capitalizing on his good looks and easy charm. In 1969, he launched his own syndicated television show, Del Reeves' Country Carnival. It was a perfect extension of his brand, a lively mix of music and cornpone comedy. The show became an important platform for up-and-coming artists, featuring regulars who would go on to become stars in their own right, like a young Barbara Mandrell, and his good friend Billy Crash Craddock. But perhaps the most overlooked and bizarre chapter of his career came from his brief but memorable foray into acting. While he had small parts in a few country-themed films like 40 Acre Feud, his most curious role was in a 1971 low-budget, high-concept movie called Samurai. It was a truly strange film, a modern-day Western, with a Japanese samurai protagonist, played by stuntman Toshiro Omasu, wandering through the American Southwest. Del Reeves, the king of country comedy, was cast against type as a tough, grizzled, menacing rancher named Abner. The film is a forgotten cult oddity today, a cinematic fever dream that baffled audiences at the time. Yet it speaks volumes about Del's boundless ambition and his willingness to try absolutely anything to expand his brand beyond the confines of a 3-minute song. It was a rarely discussed incident, a strange footnote in a career built on being relatable and down to earth, yet here he was sharing the screen with a sword-wielding hero in a film that defied all logic and genre. It revealed a restlessness, a desire to be seen as more than just a singer of funny songs that lay just beneath the surface of his ever-present Good Time Charlie grin. Behind the rhinestone curtain, the blinding stage lights and the roar of stadium applause, was a private man, Franklin, who was profoundly different from the public creation of Del. The engine that kept his personal life from spinning out of control, the anchor in the hurricane of fame, was his wife Ellen. They married in 1956, long before the hit records and the nudie suits, back when he was still a struggling musician with little more than a dream to his name. Their bond was the one unwavering constant in his life. While other stars of the era were notorious for their tumultuous personal lives fueled by temptation and the pressures of the road, Del and Ellen's marriage was a quiet, unshakable bedrock of stability. She was his partner in the truest sense, managing the household, raising their children, and providing the emotional support that allowed him to be the larger-than-life character the world demanded. His peers in Nashville remember him as a consummate professional, always on time, always prepared, always giving his all on stage. But they also recall a man who felt the immense, unspoken pressure of his own image. Being Good Time Charlie 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, was an exhausting performance. In rare, unguarded moments in interviews, you can see glimpses of the thoughtful, more serious man beneath the veneer. He spoke with keen intelligence about the craft of songwriting and the complex mechanics of the music business. This wasn't just talk. He put his knowledge into practice. He co-owned a highly successful booking agency, Del Reno Inc., with his manager, which handled the careers of other artists, including Billy Crash Craddock. He was a sharp, shrewd businessman, acutely aware that the hits and the money they generated might not last forever. One of the most humanizing, emotionally striking facts about Del, often lost in the story of his upbeat hits, was his deep, almost reverential love for the Grand Ole Opry. For him, it was never just another gig or a television appearance. It was the sacred fulfillment of a childhood dream. Veteran Opry announcer Ralph Emery recalled that even years after his induction, long after the novelty should have worn off, Del would still get a look of genuine awe in his eyes whenever he stepped into that famous circle of wood. It was his sanctuary. It was the one place where he wasn't just a humorist or a novelty act. He was a member of the family, a peer, standing on the same hallowed ground as his heroes, like Roy Acuff and Ernest Tubb. It was where Franklin Reeves, the boy from Sparta, felt he truly belonged. This inner world, however, was violently rocked in the late 1970s. In the midst of a grueling tour schedule, at an age when many men are at the peak of their careers, Del suffered a massive heart attack. It was a terrifying, abrupt confrontation with mortality. The man whose entire career was built on an image of boundless, irrepressible energy was suddenly rendered fragile and vulnerable. The recovery was long and arduous, and it forced him to do something he had never done before: slow down. While he would eventually return to performing, something fundamental had shifted. The near-death experience gave him a new, sobering perspective. It undoubtedly deepened the divide between the public showman he was paid to be and the private man who now understood with chilling clarity the fragility of it all. He continued to smile for the cameras and tell his jokes on stage, but the scare left an indelible mark, a quiet note of melancholy that would echo through the final challenging decades of his life. There was never a major scandal attached to Del Reeves's name. He wasn't embroiled in the substance abuse issues that plagued Johnny Cash or the barroom brawls of a George Jones. The central controversy of his career was far more subtle, more insidious, and, in many ways, more professionally tragic. He was a willing and brilliant victim of his own success. He had expertly built a gilded cage for himself and cheerfully locked the door. He was trapped in the novelty niche. The very qualities that had made him a superstar, the truck-driving anthems, the talking comedy, the doodaloo-doo-doo charm, also erected an impenetrable ceiling on his artistic credibility. In an era that produced the profound, gut-wrenching poetry of Chris Christopherson, the outlaw rebellion of Willie Nelson, and Waylon Jennings, and the heartbreaking, once-in-a-generation vocals of George Jones and Tammy Wynette, Del Reeves was often relegated to the role of the court jester. He was beloved, he was respected as an entertainer, but he was rarely considered serious. This presents a fascinating historical debate. Was Del Reeves a genuinely underrated vocalist whose true talent was masked by his comedic material? Or was he simply a brilliant entertainer who understood his strengths and played to them perfectly? The truth, as it often does, likely lies somewhere in the vast space between. If you dig into his album cuts and listen closely to his non-novelty songs, his straight country ballads, you hear a rich, capable, and expressive baritone voice. He had excellent pitch, a natural sense of rhythm, and flawless phrasing. But the market, the radio programmers, and ultimately the fans demanded Girl on the Billboard, not a heartfelt ballad of despair. The Nashville machine that had so efficiently built him up had also typecast him with ruthless precision. The public wanted Good Time Charlie, and the label was more than happy to provide it, album after album. As the 1970s wore on, the ground began to shift beneath his feet. Country music, always evolving, began to change again. First, the polished Nashville sound that Del epitomized faced a rebellion from within. The outlaw movement, led by artists in Austin and Nashville, championed artistic freedom, gritty realism, and a stripped-down sound. It was a direct repudiation of the producer-led, string-laden pop country that had made Del famous. He was, through no fault of his own, on the wrong side of this crucial cultural schism. Then came the slick, pop-infused urban cowboy craze of the early 1980s, sparked by the John Travolta film. Suddenly, country music was all about mechanical bulls, feathered hair, and polished pop hooks. Del's style of music, so perfectly suited for the 60s, now began to sound dated and quaint. His last top 40 hit came in 1976. By the mid-80s, the new traditionalist movement, led by young guns like Randy Travis and George Strait, brought back a sound that revered the classic honky-tonk of the 40s and 50s. Del was now caught in a cultural no-man's land, neither slickly modern enough for the pop country crowd, nor rootsy enough for the new traditionalists. The phone calls from the major record labels slowed to a trickle, and then stopped. The national tours devolved into regional fairs and weekend casino gigs. He didn't complain publicly, he was a professional, but it had to be a profoundly difficult, confusing time. He had done everything right, played the game perfectly, and sold millions of records. But tastes had simply moved on. It wasn't a personal failure. It was the relentless, unforgiving churn of popular culture. The world he had once so perfectly embodied had vanished, leaving him a living, breathing, smiling artifact of a bygone era. So what is the lasting significance of the man they called Good Time Charlie? Why does his story, the story of his brilliant rise and gentle fade, still matter today?